that, let me give a warm welcome to the panelists who've taken out the time to be here with us today, and let me also introduce them. We have Nishant Ravindran, who's a senior associate at AZBN Partners. He focuses on employment law. He routinely advises on issues pertaining to all stages of employment life cycle. He also supports clients in employee-related litigations and disputes. He has advised on various types of disciplinary and harassment claims, including sexual harassment. Thank you so much, Nishant, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Ruchira. Happy to be here.
Thank you. We also have Udaya Kumar with us. He's a lawyer by profession with more than 20 years of experience focused on labor law, consulting, and HR outsourcing operations. He brings a combination of domain expertise and ability to manage complicated operational requirements of multi-locational large organizations with respect to labor law compliance. Thank you so much, Udaya, also for joining us here.
Thanks for the introduction. Nice to be here.
Thank you. So let's get started. And I want to begin with a very fundamental question. And Nishant, this goes out to you to say, what even is a POSH annual report and, why this need for filing the returns?
So, Ruchira, thank you. And I think this question is really important because we talk so much about compliance, and I think this strikes at the root of it. So basically, what the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act requires is it requires every employer to set up an internal committee to basically receive and redress complaints of sexual harassment. And what it also says is that once at the end of the year, once this is done, the internal committee is supposed to file an annual report of the cases it's received, disposed of, the number of cases which are pending over a certain timeline, with the employer and the local district officer. So the district officer is a person who's been appointed under the Act itself to basically oversee and implement the Act at a government level. Okay, so the annual report under the POSH Act is basically this compliance requirement or the filing which the internal committee makes to the employer and the district officer, describing the kind of actions it has taken in relation to sexual harassment complaints at the workplace. So this is filing in essence. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that helps. And we will have a lot of follow-up questions naturally. So following up on that with Udaya, a question to say, who files these returns? Is it the organization? Is it the internal committee? Is there a format for filing these returns?
See, there is no specific format as such for filing the report, which is prescribed under the POSH rule. But they have given a key ingredients or what are the contents to be there in the POSH annual report to be filed to the district officer. Having said that, who files this? It is the duty of the district officer, duty of the ICC to file the annual report, and also it is the duty of the employer to monitor that the ICC has filed the report in time to the respective authority, which is the district officer. And the format, again, if you see, go to the powers which has been vested to the authorities, they can call for the information in such a manner that the confidentiality has not been broken up, but yeah, there are tailor-made formats which is sought by different districts. So Haryana seeks it in a different manner. In South Tamil Nadu may seek it in a different manner, but the key ingredients are only the same. So it may contain your number of complaints which are there and whether it has been disposed of within stipulated time, what are the pendencies. So these are the reports. And in addition, certain district officers like in North and all also seek from the employer side whether respective orientation programs have been conducted, whether POSH trainings have been given, and a declaration, a two-liner declaration also stating that whether POSH policy is there in place, kind of stuff.
So Udaya, am I right in inferring that the disclosures that are required to be made could vary across the states?
Yes.
Okay. And if there is a nil return, I mean, if there is no complaints that have come up or something has gone through conciliation, how does that come up in these disclosures? And is there a return that still needs to be filed?
Nil return is still required. So annual report has to be filed even in case of there is no cases been reported. You have to report it as zero number of cases being dealt.
Okay. All right. And Nishant, you brought up the term district officer, and we've seen this term management district officer in the mentioned in the act. And I think where organizations often struggle is that who gets qualified as management, and especially in an organization that may be headquartered outside of India, for an organization that maybe really have a very small presence in India. How does that get defined? And who is district officer, and where does this report actually get submitted? So, a couple of questions in one there.
Thank you, Ruchira. So this, I mean, given the way most workplaces have developed and newer forms of, say, reporting lines where things are quite merged and not as, say, simple as what it used to be, where you used to have a single person who's in charge of the employees and the employees report to that person. Now you have really diverted, say, reporting lines where there can be an employee in India and someone abroad will be in, say, in a position of management or their direct manager. So you're right, things have gotten a little complicated. But what would be useful is to actually understand what the Act says about who an employer is and what management is. Now, the Act simply says that in case of a private sector establishment, an employer is a person who exercises ultimate management, supervision, and control over that particular workplace. And then it goes on to say that management is basically a person or a board or a committee which is in charge of determining the policies of that particular workplace or organization. Okay, so in essence, someone who can be deemed an employer under the Act is someone who exercises supervision and control. So in a lot of situations, it would probably be, say, the the managing director or the board of a particular place. But there are situations where, say, the India office is possibly just, say, a branch office, so there are very few employees here and there's no one really in supervision or control. Then there might be potential to argue that it might be someone who's sitting, say, in the head office abroad, etc. So what it really comes down is to apply the principles provided under the Act to the particular workplace to understand who would be in management and control in that particular place. Now, when it comes to district officer, and one of the reasons that there's a lot of ambiguity around this, is that a district officer under the Act itself is defined a little broadly. So it basically says a district officer is a person appointed by the appropriate government, which in most cases is the state government. And that person can either be a district magistrate or an additional district magistrate or a collector or a deputy collector. Now, the reason there's so much ambiguity around this is that it varies from state to state. And it's left up to the relevant implementing, say, uh, department of the government to actually come out and notify this particular district officer. So what happens is that an establishment would be required to say somewhat keep a pulse on what the government is doing in that particular state. Now, some states have come out very, have clearly stated who their district officers are, whereas others haven't. So this again is a state-to-state exercise which establishments would have to put up.
Okay. All right. And I also want to follow that up, Nishant, with the whole chief portal that's been put in place by the government. Now, if a complaint is registered there, does that still fall under the ambit of the organization, and is it expected to reflect in the filing as well?
So again, Ruchira, this is a very good question, and I know there is some ambiguity around this. At least the way I would look at it is now what the SHE portal does is it takes complaints. It allows women employees to have the ability to file complaints when they're not so inclined to maybe do so with the ICC, or the ICC hasn't dealt with it in the manner which they would have believed it should have been dealt with. And then what the She portal does is it forwards these complaints either to the local complaints committee or your internal complaints committee and then follows up with it. So basically, it acts as a form of a repository as well as a form of, like, say, forwarding complaints, etc. So since the complaint still pertains to the particular workplace or the establishment, it would, I mean, it would make sense that the establishment itself treats it as a complaint that has been made by one of their employees or contractors or agreed women of their workplace, and accordingly reflect that in their annual.
Okay. All right. So then it becomes a part of, just like any other complaint they would take care of, it would reflect in the filing as well.
Yes.
Your report should conduct all the incidents which has been reported. See, the purpose why SheBox has been enabled is for the reason that female employees may not be very much, free to go ahead and report it before an ICC or have some restriction issues. So they go ahead and register the complaint in SheBox. So having said that, SheBox is a tool which has been developed by the Department of WCD, and also all your reports which you file before a district officer again lines up and goes to the Department of Women and Child Development only. Even your government, your deportees, everything, central service rules everywhere, who have state government or central government also, are directly, they doesn't file the report directly to district officers, rather they file the reports to the WCD only. All your this case repositories goes, and there becomes a bigger level wholesome analytics which happens on which district there are a lot of
right
cases which has been registered against women harassment and all this stuff.
Sure.
And lot of state WCD boards have also enabled that, or mandated and notified for specific reasons to enter all the ICC committee details and contact numbers of each and every private establishments in the SheBox portal. They have enabled it only for the purpose that if in case of any cases being registered under SheBox, it has been routed to the respective ICC. And they do a follow-up and monitoring on whether it has been disposed of in 90 days and whether the principals have been properly adhered to while doing an inquiry and other stuff.
Okay. All right. And in terms of filing again, Udaya, if a case is open as on 31st December, where does that fall? Which year would that get counted in, after it's closed?
It depends both. So the information which we divulge in annual report consists of open cases, pending cases, closed cases, and which is below 90 days or above 90 days kind of stuff. So if it is on 31st, it is open, you'll show it as open in 2020, 1920, and then 2021 it might get closed. So it might be there open, it might be open and pending. Here it might come as closed.
Okay, all right. Yeah, because organizations are also a little wary about the number of cases that get reflected in that at the end of the day. So I think
it might come as a reported incident, but not closed at that point of time.
Sure. Okay. And Udaya, we'd like to hear from you on the amendment of the account rules. What does this amendment require for POSH administrators to do?
Which amendment are you speaking about? The codes, labor codes you're telling? Or?
Yeah.
Labor code doesn't speak about your POSH. So POSH is again still dealt separately.
So are there any recent amendments that the administrators should know about, that and also how do they stay updated on some of these amendments? Because there's always this fear to say that what if we miss out on certain amendments? What if they don't reach us?
So amendments are actually notified from time to time in gazettes and other things. But with regard to POSH, there has not been any amendment except for a repealment of ICC being from internal complaints committee has been changed to internals committee. That's it. That was the only amendment which came post 2013 rules and act itself. So there is no other this thing. So, and 2013 itself, there was a clarificatory amendment which came on. What would be a workplace, which and all will can be construed as a workplace post that. So nothing after that. So it 2013 being the enactment year. After that, there was not much amendment over it. To be
Right.
frank enough, my personal opinion is the legislation itself was not taken that seriously, and it took its own decades to come. So 1992, the incident occurs, and then 2013, it takes a form of law, and then from 2013, now we are in
Sure.
2020. Still,
Sure.
people are not that serious about how it has to be properly implemented, and women's safety and security are still not taken that serious, which how it has to be taken is what is my personal opinion.
Right. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Uday. Yes,
Add
Nishant.
to, yeah, just to what add to what Udaya just said is that, yeah, I mean, in terms of amendments to the act itself, there really haven't been anything. But just to highlight, there was a requirement, I think, under the Companies Act, the companies rules,
Yeah.
which basically said that the report of the board is basically supposed to contain details of their compliance with the Sexual Harassment Act.
Mm-hmm.
So this again, while implementation is, there's a lot of room for development of or to implement the act fully and to encompass all its principles. This at least lends to the idea that, I mean, there are moves to make it a little more that uh, I mean, implement it a little bit better and to ensure that there's some level of supervision into its implementation.
Okay. All right. Yeah, sure. That is very helpful. And Nishant, just continuing with you, you spoke about how organizations are changing their structures, etc. We now also have the size of organizations that could be very different. You have an SME, you have a startup versus a large organization. So, are the compliance requirements exactly the same across all these organizations, or are there any kind of differences or change, that we should be aware about?
So, Ruchira, in terms of compliance, technically, I would say that it would be same across all organizations, regardless of how they are categorized. But one thing, a slight differentiation in terms of the act itself is from the wordings of the act, we can interpret that establishments with 10 or more employees required to constitute an internal complaints committee. So establishments with lesser than that,
Right.
you could say, aren't mandatorily required to have an ICC. So just lending from there, if you don't have an ICC, then your ICC may not be in a position to actually make an annual report. But I would still, I mean, think that the employer is supposed to actually oversee the rest of the act and see how it's implemented. The difference would be that when employees are aggrieved, they can potentially raise complaints either on the she box or to their local complaints committee. So I would think that that is the small differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
But largely what we're seeing is that even establishments which are much smaller try in essence at least to follow the act and to adhere to it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, along similar lines, if the organization is small, it also struggles in terms of the bandwidth or the resource. So to having a senior woman employee who can be made a presiding officer, to meet with the requirement of every 3 years, you rotate the committee members, you change who the presiding officer is. So how do organizations that don't have the resources for this, how do they manage and what can they do?
So, Ruchira, again, like I said, I mean, the act basically assumes that if you have more than 10 employees, you should be able to constitute an ICC or an internal committee or an IC. But a lot of times, practically, this doesn't happen. So, one way of looking at it is for an organization to basically re-examine, say, its diversity policy, etc., to see why there aren't enough women at the establishment.
Sure.
Okay, but an immediate step which a lot of establishments could take, and especially given now that the POSH Act has been in place for quite a while, so it's possible that ICC members would have had to have been say changed at least twice now, because that term is technically for 3 years. Is that the act allows employers to basically have women employees, say, of other workplaces of their organization, sit as presiding officers of their ICC. But if you would break it down further and say that there are no such people and the establishment doesn't really have any other workplace where senior women employees can be nominated as the presiding officer, I would say that you look at the intent behind the act. And the intent is to ensure that there is a non-biased senior woman employee who's sitting as
Sure.
the presiding officer. So if you have no one else, you record it appropriately internally, and then that person continues till such time you find someone else.
All right. Yes, I think that is very, very helpful. Thank you. And Uday, the question that I wanted to pose to you at this point is that there are organizations which are very multi-locational today. So how do they manage the filing? The headquarter could be in one city while the other locations could be pan-India. How does the return filing work in that setup?
See, for the compliance perspective, it has to be strictly with the district officers. Wherever your workplace is has a jurisdictional district officer, you are required to file it before the district officer, because the data collated is with the geographical locations which goes to the Department of WCD. So they kind of do an analysis for which place has a more vulnerability and what measures has to be taken by the state and the uh, other safety authorities to ensure that the women are being in put in a safer work locations. So it has to be always on a respective jurisdictional district officer. Having said that, yes, there are chances where your officers are there in the same district. So there are some 3 officers in the same
Correct.
district. Those 3 officers can give a collated, consolidated report, because they can have one IC also there. So even in your constitution of IC also says that every locations per
Yes.
jurisdictional location you need to have a IC. But yes, there are practical administrative issues where you cannot have multiple IC, and employees kind of have an centralized IC who can travel and kind of go and address there. That also satisfies the requirement. But while reporting, it has to be on a jurisdictional district officer basis, so that the establishment is being constituted to be compliant.
Okay. So we understand from what you're saying that it's more a geographical view that we need to take, and
Yes.
given in the same district, there is some flexibility to probably combine and report it as one return.
Yes, because the report is filed by the IC only. So the
Yeah.
IC can file it
Exactly.
consolidated from all this.
Yes. So the same or a similar view that we take for IC composition is the similar view that we can take for the return filing as well.
Correct, correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And Nishant, the question to you, because this is something that often clients reach out and say that, they've missed their filing in the last couple of years. There's been a slip, maybe 2 years, 3 years. So would they, when they go ahead and file their returns now this year, one is, of course, they need to, but could there be a penalty that they could attract for having missed a couple of years? Is there something that they can do to correct that?
So, Ruchira, again, this, given that the act is, in terms of the larger scheme of things, it's relatively new itself. It's the 2013 Act. So there has been a bit of struggle in terms of implementation and compliance as well, and also a bit of ambiguity because for a long time people weren't sure with whom they're supposed to file these returns. They might have filed it with the wrong authority. So what would become important is to actually understand your level of compliance with the Act. Okay, now a straightforward answer is that if you missed filing, then technically it is a non-compliance. You are opening yourself up to potential fines or penalties under the
Sure.
Act. But what is more important is now you look back, and if you're looking at making your filing now, you see if how compliant you've been with the Act in the past. Now, if you're in substantial compliance with the Act, where you've constituted an ICC, the ICC has followed due process under the Act and the rules in dealing with complaints. And the only non-compliance is in terms of actually making this filing, but you have all the records on hand. I would say the exposure to that kind of an establishment is much lower. So even if you go ahead and you file your annual return now, and if questions get asked, or you decide to make a back filing with the authority and say file an application with them saying that you've been compliant, but you missed it for X reason, and now you're filing everything. I would say that the chances of, say, the authority looking to penalize such an organization might be lesser because you are still in substantial compliance with the act. But say if in the past you haven't really constituted an ICC, women employees haven't been able to raise any complaints, or a relatively large organization, you haven't conducted workshops, you don't have a policy, and you know there have been potential cases which haven't been dealt with, then I would say in that case, when you're actually going to file your when you're going to file your return,
Right.
there might be a possibility that, based on the officer who's looking at it, that you might get hauled up for past and non-compliances. So this would again depend on a facts and circumstances basis.
Okay, sure. And a question to both Nishant and Udaya. So recently, we've heard that some of the districts have, or in fact, some of the states have asked for their internal committees to be registered, and that kind of a requirement has come in. And this is something that Udaya we spoke about a little bit earlier in this, to say that it gets the internal committee or the people who are administrating that a little worried to say, what if we miss out? Because again, where do we find this information? So how does that again work? Is there a central place that they can access this kind of information, just to make sure that they don't slip on any of this?
No, see, there is no central information for this. Only thing is periodical alerts or notification circulars which has been circulated by the Department of Women and Child Development will contain all this information. So that's the portal where they can see. So even for registering, you have to go with the state specific WCD department portal only, and they are the people who collate all this information. And certain things, yeah, the alerts or circulars notifications are reported from Labor Department as well, where they're they're also made as a authority to it. But yes, majorly it comes only from the Department of WCD.
Okay.
Yeah. And Ruchira, just taking off from where they are left off. So this is an issue not only with the Sexual Harassment Act, but with most labor and employment statutes. And Udaya is smiling because he knows how difficult it is. But generally, the way we get notifications, it's very state specific, and you actually need to exercise a certain level of diligence when tracking these updates and notifications to make sure that you're on point. So I would say that the best thing is to get in touch with someone like you, like Interweave or like Udaya, to actually know when such notifications come out, because it takes a certain level of diligence to actually track these. And
Right.
there is no per se, consolidated database where you can get this information very easily. People have tried, but it's best to actually check from time to time with someone who actually knows. So that would be my very practical takeaway from this.
Yeah.
Okay. And is there any kind of electronic, filing or submissions, etc., that's being enabled?
No, electronic filing has not yet been enabled for
Right.
this as of now. So it's only ICC and other issues have been made to be uploaded there. For reporting, it still goes to in a manual way to
Yes.
district offices, because district offices have not been given that technological this thing to have it on this thing. On an online portal or kind of stuff.
Sure.
That is not yet been enabled. Yeah, but we are looking into it, because the present government is most of inclined to give everything under a digital platform.
Right.
That might come. That
Right.
might come.
Yes. Yeah. That should be probably the near future, at least, not too far away in the future.
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. Cool. And again, a question to both Nishant and Udaya. One of the things that's on everybody's mind is how severe are the consequences of non-compliance? We know that the Act talks about that there will be a penalty at the first offense, double of that at the second offense, and a risk of the business license being taken away at the third offense? And what if there have been these minor non-compliance at multiple levels? Are the organizations likely to, at the first instance, lose their business license, or is it a linear process? So this is a very big concern on everybody's mind. So we'd like to hear from both of you on this. Whoever would like to go first?
See, yeah, it depends. Actually, it all depends upon the severity of non-compliance or the contraventions which happens. If the act itself being under criminal nature, so if it amounts to any grave offense or grave this thing, then yes, it will be huge, and that will be taken seriously. But yeah, for non-filing of reports and other things, we have seen kind of practical scenario. We have seen certain warnings have been given, and getting away with the reports. We file it with warnings or something. But yeah, a couple of times it may be accepted, but not every time. And yes, as you said, legally speaking, there are all the chances that the business licenses have been cancelled. Even otherwise, that will be treated as a non-complaint even while you file your board reports in your company's regulatory body. So there also it can be treated as a non-compliance, and there can be a consequential penalty there as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. Nishant, you'd like to add?
Yeah, so just adding to what Udaya said, so in terms of a very strict reading of the act, it is a linear process. So initially, when you're held non-compliant, you will be a fine will be levied once you're convicted of the non-compliance, and then at a later point of time, if you're again convicted of non-compliance, then there's potential for say cancellation of license and double the fine, etc.
Right.
But like you said, it all boils down to the severity of the offense and what exactly was the specific non-compliance. And Ruchira, also another thing I would like to point out is that now in terms of, say, compliance with the POSH Act, more than the specific non-compliances in the Act, I think it's also important to consider, say, public perception and the risk to reputation which would occur in terms of employers and establishments, because I would say that, say, sexual harassment at the workplace has really become one of the key issues globally as well in terms of just workplace ethics and things like that. So apart from the fines and penalties, I would also think that it's important for an establishment to determine that it's taking the right step in terms of issues of workplace sexual harassment by ensuring at least that it's compliant with the act. So I think that's a bigger risk that institutions and establishments should be aware of and keep in mind when deciding on compliance with the act.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective that we encourage organizations to have a view of the bigger picture and not just keep it very focused on the consequences of non-compliance of the act. Yeah, and coming to the context that we are currently all of us in, where we're all virtually collaborating, the last 9 months or so has been in terms of POSH, all the investigations have moved online. So I'd like to hear from both of you, what are the kind of challenges that you are hearing from organizations that you are partnering with? And also, what are the compliance implications in this particular scenario? Like, for example, earlier we used to insist on everything being printed, hard copied, and filed. But now none of that is happening. Everything is soft copies. So along those lines, what are some of the changes that you are seeing, and what is it that you would like for the audience to know in this context? Nishant, would you like to go first?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, with the whole COVID outbreak and organizations working from home, where in a lot of situations they don't have anyone going to their physical offices, say compliance with the act has been a little challenging, more in terms of I mean, employees still there is still potential, and in fact there have been I would say, a number of cases reported of sexual harassment, even with employees working from home.
That's right.
So, but the thing is, in terms of actual filing of a complaint, where you require 5 copies of the complaint to be filed with the ICC, etc., those things may not be fully possible because everyone's working from home. There's nowhere to actually file this complaint. So, I would say you look at the substantive aspect of the act and the intent behind the act. Now, everything said and done, the bare essence of the act is to ensure that any complaint of workplace sexual harassment is redressed and the aggrieved woman is given a certain amount of justice and the perpetrator is punished. So now, if you just look at the act in this very, say, I would say, distilled perspective of actually
Right.
looking at its intent, what we can understand is it's important for the ICC to still continue to function. Now, if you can't actually get complaints in written copies, go ahead and take complaints in electronic copies, but make sure that those electronic complaints which are forwarded to the ICC are password protected, and you take certain levels of diligence to ensure that it's secure, and you conduct your proceedings to the best of your abilities given the circumstances. I mean, if you can't conduct physical hearings, you conduct virtual hearings.
Sure.
Establishments are doing that for other aspects of their business. So I don't see how it shouldn't apply to this case as well. So in essence, I would say whatever you can do to ensure compliance, even if it's, say, moving slightly from physical filings to electronic filings in terms of complaints, hearings, etc., establishments should do that. I don't think they should take a stance that, given that they can't conduct, say, hearings in person, or they can't receive complaints in writing, that they shouldn't take on record any complaints made by the
All right.
Adding
Thank you
to
so much.
what Nishant says, see, you also need to gauge the situation and with caution with the uh, Evidence Act as well. So whether the documents, whether the complaints which has been filed to be filed in written, whether a mail complaint can be treated, is, as per the Evidence Act, it is equally valid. So all these things you have to have a caution with the Evidence Act also, whether the documents which you are having and whether the virtual inquiry recordings what you have, the way how you document an inquiry, whether has a relevance with the Evidence Act and acceptable under the law. Then of course, yes, it has all the, you meet all the requirements of the legislation.
Okay, so the Evidence Act is something also that needs to be given consideration.
Yeah, so tomorrow if it goes to the next litigation level and it has been challenged, how the inquiry has been dealt with by the either by the accused or the aggrieved person, yes, in that event you may be required to provide this as a documentation.
Okay, interesting. And would it also require the current circumstances? Do they also require us to relook at the way our POSH policy is probably written out and reword that and recommunicate some of this to the employees to say how the process that always was has been adapted to the virtual context? Is that an expectation?
Yeah, that might be done as a step of due diligence, but yes, even otherwise, if your policy is not in line with the law, law always supersedes. So if it is acceptable under the eyes of law, yes, that supersedes, irrespective whether your policy is in line with the legislation or not.
Okay. All right. And before I open it up for the questions from the audience, just between the two of you, are there any good practices that you'd like to talk about that you have come across in terms of just compliance and even beyond compliance, like Nishanti spoke about, just keeping a view of whether we're doing the right thing or not, whether we're keeping a safe environment for our employees or not. So any good practices that you'd like to quickly highlight before we open it up to participant questions?
See, from my experience, what I have seen is there are companies who kind of adapt or follow the practice of giving orientation programs for the IC members or the employees only for the sake of a statutory requirement.
Right.
Only for twice a year or kind of stuff. But there are more other training modules or orientation programs which kind of make both for the employees, women employees as well as the male employees, how it has to be properly treated or properly dealt with, to have a proper circumstance with the women employee working environment and kind of stuff. So that proactiveness is still missing with the employers is what was my feel in my experience. We have been conducting this. We are in part of this training programs, orientation programs. Only most of the requirements only for the statutory perspective.
Sure.
But yeah, you need to make sure that there are a lot of people. I mean, where majorly the vulnerability, if you see, it's in BPO kind of sectors, BPO sectors, ITS sectors, and the report says so. So, who are working in orders, there you have a lot of reports, and there this kind of proactive orientation programs and measures has to be taken, is what is my.
All right. Thank you. Nishant?
Ruchira, like Udaya said, I would think that in order to achieve the intent of the act, there are basically three sets of persons or that would have to be fully aware in order for the act to be effective. One is the employees, because they're supposed to know what their rights are under the act and how to actually agitate if those rights are denied. The next thing is your management and senior management, because at the end of the day, they are the people who are going to be the link between, say, employees and the ICC. Even if it's not put down in policy, that's how practically it would come out. And the last thing is your ICC itself, who's actually in charge of, say, receiving complaints and then actually redressing them. So I think one of the best practices for organizations is to take a dedicated approach of effectively, like Udaya said, a lot of people just do it for the requirement under the statute, but to effectively ensure that your employees, management, as well as the ICC are trained in terms of their obligations, rights, and responsibilities under the Act. Now, just focusing on either of these sections will not be useful, because if your employees are fully aware of their rights and obligations, but your ICC is not aware of how to actually conduct an investigation or an inquiry, you will fall short at some aspect.
Right.
And the same thing, if you have a really well-trained internal committee and your employees don't know their rights, the ICC might not actually get complaints, and at a later point of time, it might actually adversely impact the establishment, because things might come out in the future, and at that point of time, employees might not have known that they could have agitated these rights. But it's too late for the organization because it's out in the public, and then the organization again suffers like a very reputational risk. So one of the best practices in my mind, and like how Udaya said, is to ensure that people are well trained and aware of their rights and obligations under the Act.
Yeah, I think that's what even we encourage organizations to really focus on: respectful workplace, and this being a part of that rather than only the compliance or consequences of that. So thank you so much, Udaya and Nishant. I'm going to request Smita to help us with bringing the audience questions to the panel.
Thanks, Ruchira. Thanks, Udaya and Nishant. Very insightful webinar indeed. And we have loads of questions, and I've tried my best to collate it. So I think we have about 20 to 25 minutes, and we'll try and cover as much as questions as possible. So the first one is, for conciliation matters, does it go under nil return or reported as a case? And under disciplinary action, it goes as conciliation. So I think the question is, if it's a conciliation, does it go under nil report or is it reported as a case?
For conciliation, preliminary conciliation, we still tell not to report it as a case. Only once post conciliation, if it is still turned out to be a sexual harassment complaint, then you report it as a case under POSH.
Thanks, Udaya. The second question is, where a district has no local officer in place, to which office is the annual report to be sent or filed? And a follow-up question is also, does it need to be filed entity-wise or state-wise?
No, it rather needs to be on entity-wise, but of course, as you have 4 entities, 5 entities in same district, you can collate and put it through the same ICC.
Okay. So we had a lot of questions around this particular one. For someone who's handling the office of POSH for the first time, is there a checklist somewhere that we can refer to while filing?
Checklist of what needs to be filed in report, or how it is?
Yeah, what needs to be filed, like a template. Is there a template or checklist that the ICC can use to file the report?
Yeah, it is there, but again, it depends based on the state where you have presence, because every district officer has their own format. As I said before, Haryana has a different format. Karnataka, Tamil Nadu has a different format.
Yeah.
So that format has been circulated by the district officers, whoever have been notified, and they seek the information in a particular format. In that, you have to give.
And Smita, like Udaya had previously said, in terms of the essence of the report, that's provided in the rules itself, as in the specific heads of details which are required. So the format may vary, but in essence, that will be the information that would be required.
Thanks, Nishant. Also, is there a list of state-wise district officers' name that one can refer to?
Yeah, there are. The WCD claims that 21 states have already reported the district offices. We have collated kind of a lot of district offices to where it has to be filed. I think post this session, I can share that with you people. So
Sure, that will be helpful.
wherever we have collated a number of district offices under different places, yeah, we can share that to you.
And Ruchira, there's a question specifically to you. The returns are the returns to be filed as per calendar year or financial year? And also, what is the last date to file POSH annual returns?
I would like to answer it, but
Sure.
so it's always a calendar year. Any labor legislation, nothing goes on an annual, on a financial year. It's only your company rule which speaks about the financial year. Even if your company returns what you filed on your board, which seeks a POSH return, POSH complaints report, also speaks only on the preceding calendar year. So you have to have this return filed based on January 1st to December 31st. And there is no, though there is no return date which has been specified under the rule, all the district officer uh, obligate the employers or the establishments to file it on or before 31st of January. They seek it before 31st of January, because they are required to submit all these things with their analytics by 31st March to the WCD. So they take 2 months time to do all this district level analysis.
Thanks, Uday. The next question is, kindly help us understand, basis the amendment to the Act in 2016, and clarify the expanded role and responsibilities of the IC.
See, IC's rules, again, there is no big change about what IC has to do and other these things. But yes, the amendment of Act by 2016 was only with regard to that repealment. So it had this internal complaints committee has been changed to internals committee. So that was one thing, and local committee has changed to local complaints committee changed to. The word complaints have been taken off and it made as a committee as such, because they didn't want to give a color of any criminal verbiage or any kind of negative this thing to it. So that was one intent below that. Again, what are the duties of ICC and how it has to deal with the complaints and other things? Uh, the WCD has come out with a very clean and very exhaustive handbook. If you can download it, it is always available in the WCD portal. There is a very exhaustive handbook which clearly gives you an idea of what an ICC it needs to keep in mind while conducting an inquiry. What are the principles of natural justice? How a show cause notice to be? What are the powers vested to an IC member? What kind of approach to be taken? Whether they can construe or prelude a person who is accused to be a offender. All this has been given, and there are also kind of test modules and also training kind of things which has been put in the portal. I would suggest all the IC members to please go through it. Whoever is in IC committee, please go through it, and it gives a very fair idea of how to deal with complaints.
Okay. So if the entity is operating out of two locations, let's say Bangalore and Mumbai, should the filing be done for two locations or one location, say Bangalore, where the registered office or entity is situated? Nishant, would you like to take this?
Yeah, sure, Smita. Thank you. So I would think that it has to, now what the Act requires, if you break it down, is basically to have an ICC at each location, at each office, an IC is supposed to be constituted. So going on that basis, your IC at each entity would, at each office would be required to file the report. Now, practically, you might choose to consolidate and file it, but if it's in different states, it's advisable to actually file two separate.
Thanks, Nisha. Also, can the final recommendations from the IC be modified by, let's say, HR head or management team?
So, Smita, the recommendations of the IC is supposed to be made to the employer. Now, in practice and practically speaking, I would say that it's not recommended because the IC is in charge of actually, or the IC is technically supposed to be trained to understand the Act and the implications of the Act and the specific complaint as well. So in essence, it's the IC which provides its recommendations and the employer actually implements these recommendations under the Act. So I would say that while the employer might have the ability to modify the punishment or the recommendations, it's not always recommended because the IC is the one who's technically, I would say, educated or trained under the Act.
Okay. Also, can a contract employee be appointed as the presiding officer if there is no woman leader available in the organization?
So in terms of the presiding officer is supposed to be an employee of the organization. Now, if it's a contract employee, say if it's a fixed term employee, then potentially, yes, so long as the term of employment runs through the necessary appointment period. But I don't think it would be very apt for, say, a contract worker to be appointed as the presiding officer. Now, in case you don't have anyone and there is absolutely no woman employee at the establishment who can act as a presiding officer, at that point of time, it might, the establishment itself would have to take a more practical call to see if they want to engage maybe a specialist in the field to act as the presiding officer. But the short answer to that is it would have to be an employee of the organization.
A follow-up to that, can IC team delegate the investigation to any other subject matter expert in the organization, keeping all the other requirements as per the Act?
So the Act itself doesn't allow for that. It's a gray area. But going by the essence of why the IC is there in the first place, the IC is supposed to investigate the actual issue. So I would think that taking a more practical call, you can potentially invite an expert to give their view on, say, how the investigation is being conducted or potentially get their inputs on it. But I don't think you can delegate the investigation per se to a subject matter expert within the organization apart from the IC.
Udaya, is it mandatory to register in SheBox portal?
Mandatory to register in SheBox portal, wherever the states have mandated, yes, you have to.
Okay. So I think we have another question. Does the IC need to have a fixed number of internal meetings as per the Act, even if there are no cases registered?
Yeah, the IC needs to quarterly have a meeting within themselves. The IC members are required to have a quarterly meeting.
Okay. And also, do we submit the return in person or to the district officer?
Return of?
The annual returns?
Yeah, the annual return.
Annual return, come again, annual return.
Should it be submitted in person or to the district officer?
No, it's IC which submits to the district officer. It can be by any way. So you
Yeah,
have
so
to
it
need
can
an
be physically. It has to be physically done. Yeah.
physically you have to done,
Okay.
and you need to have an acknowledgement for it.
Okay. I think we have one last question. If 3 to 4 entities are in the same city and the IC is same for all, can the return be collated for all entities and filed for the same city?
I think this has been the most common repeated
Yeah.
question that they have.
No, entity, how it again acts as. So if it is a separate legal entity, then though you have a IC member, maybe your external member can be same, but obviously your other IC members cannot be same because it depends on your employees. Again, the other members or chairpersons will be of the specific entity employees. Or if you have a common ICC for all your entities, group company entities, but again there you have to, the IC may have a separate reports and it has to be submitted entity wise for the reason that each entity is constituted to be a different establishment.
Okay. And where can we refer to the list of state mandated, where can we refer the list of states mandated for the registration under SHE-Box? Udaya, you had mentioned that the state needs to mandate the SHE-Boxes, right? So where
There
do...
were notifications. Again, it again goes back to the Department of WCD. Telangana has mandated, Haryana has mandated, and Maharashtra has mandated. Maharashtra, one goes to municipal authority and the other goes to WCD. So there are two different. Maharashtra has two different. Mumbai and non-Mumbai locations have two different WCD box where it has to be registered. As far as my knowledge goes, these are the three locations where I can recollect. But yeah, there are specific places where it has to be. State WCD will give you that information.
Okay, all right. So, Ruchira, we have no more questions,
Sure.
but do you want to open it up for people to
Yeah.
ask questions? Because I think we
Yeah.
still have about 15 minutes or
Sure.
so.
And I also wanted to just add to that question to say, in the current times when of lockdown, etc., is there a date? Is there any change in the date, or is it still 31st of January for the filing of the return?
As of now, it still remains to be 31st of Jan. Yeah, but during the lockdown, what we have seen is lot of other due dates have been extended. So, like your professional tax, labor
Right.
welfare fund, or remittances for PF, ESA
Right.
remittances, and all have kind of taking a very lenient view and have been extending the due dates. That can also happen with our POSH returns. So the due date is still there. Jan 31st is what
Okay.
we see. So probably at that time around it makes come.
All right. Okay, fine. Yeah, thank you so much. And so, like Smita mentioned, I think all the questions from the chat box are taken care of. If anybody would like to interact with the panel, we can, have another 5 or 10 minutes for that. So you can raise your hands and we will unmute you so that you can pose your question directly if there's still anything that you'd like to discuss.
So I think Kasim has raised his hand for a while now. Sandra, can you unmute Kasim?
Yes, I've unmuted Kasim. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Very good afternoon to all of y'all. This session has been really an eye opener for me, but I definitely have a couple of questions in regards with law. I did hear a while back that the government do question the board in terms of diversity. So, is there any law pertaining within POSH that the percentage of women has to be equal to men, or different diversity aspects?
Good question, Kazim. See, as of now, there is no obligation or a statute which obligates an employer to hire this many number of women employees equivalent to or a ratio to male employees. Having said that, there is some legislation like Equal Remuneration Act, which states that a women employee working with the same nature of job, performing same nature of job of a male, should not be paid lesser than the say what is being paid to a male employee. This is what is there as of now. Having said that, you again there most of the organizations have equal opportunity policies in other places where they do not even put such restrictions that women employees can be hired only to this extent. Yes, if at all they see more women employees or more talented or more required for suits to a job nature, they do hire that. But there is no ratio in like this what you are expecting. There's no such method as of now. In government, there is such quota systems. Though.
All right. Thank you so much for the answer. And one last question that I have with you all is in regards with the POSH policy. I'm assuming it is gender neutral. It is not only focused on women, but there are a lot of times in reality, people from the LGBTQ community is harassed at work, or maybe asked favors by their immediate manager. And it can be also a woman manager asking for a favor from a subordinate. So are these situations or these circumstances also considered to be a part of POSH policy, or it's only women centric?
Nishant, would you like to take that?
So, Kasim, the act itself is only women centric. The POSH Act applies only to women employees and women, and specifically protects women employees. But what we've seen is that a lot of organizations tend to have gender neutral anti-sexual harassment policies where anybody can raise a complaint of sexual harassment, and it doesn't have to necessarily only be a woman employee. But the way this is dealt with is the establishment can either choose to follow the same process and the same framework required under the act, or have its own process for this and treat it as a disciplinary proceeding. But in short, the act doesn't cover situations like this, and it's left up to the establishment to actually decide how it's going to deal with situations like this. And more often than not, slightly more advanced establishments or workplaces which are in touch with the times have gender neutral policies.
To
Thank you
add
so
to
much.
Kasim, there is also POSH doesn't deal with the gender neutral one. Yes, as Nishan said, there are a lot of establishment which has a gender neutral policies. The reason being mostly in Western countries, other places where you have separate legislation for LGBT community. Having said that, in India also there is a transgender persons protection and rights bill passed by the parliament in 2019, and the rules are also being framed by 2020, and the act is there gazetted in 25th September 2020. It is there. So there you have equal opportunity policies have to be framed. Then your grievance mechanism needs to be there. There needs to be no discrimination in employment of transgender community. All these things are there. The, yeah, the law is getting its shape.
Thank you so much. One last follow-up question to this. Okay, depending on the severity of the offense, or maybe the severity of the complaint, the company would decide to uh, uh, channelize the same route how they would do it for a women employee. But then, are these kind of cases also reported to district officer through POSH reports, or how is it? If I can ask, this is the last question.
No, as of now, the POSH return report consists only for the gender-specific incidents. For other incidents, it has to be dealt by the grievance redressal committee of the establishment, and yes, that will be reported before can be reported under specific heads up to the IR authority.
Yeah. So Kasim, basically, if the annual report under the Act only restricts itself to complaints of sexual harassment that are covered under the Act. So if it's not a woman employee who's making or not a woman who's making a complaint, then per se it will not be, or does not have to be reflected as part of the Act.
But
Companies have their own internal reporting mechanisms, but in short, it doesn't.
but what if an individual consider himself as gender fluid and maybe,
So Kasim, Ruchira here, I just want to respond saying that the Act has a little bit of a narrow view right now. But what we do expect, Kasim, is for the organizations to have a broader view and
sure.
draft policies that address the unique needs of the LGBTQ community. So that is definitely an expectation from any progressive organization. So completely hear you.
Thank you so much.
So,
Thank you so much.
Ruchira,
I'm done with my
yeah,
questions.
thanks, Kasim.
And
Thanks,
really,
Ruchira.
Thank you.
So I think in the interest of time, we have about 3 more people who've raised their hands. So I think we can quickly take those questions.
Yes, sure.
Sandra, can you unmute Vibhor, please?
Yes. Yeah, the board is on.
Hello.
Go ahead, report.
Yeah, hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my just simple question is about what is the procedure of registration with the local authorities? So we can do it online or we have to send the manual papers to the department?
Well, there is no registration requirement of an establishment to be done under a POSH. Only thing is when you have this online portal where it seeks the information of IC, you need to do. But how the information flows to the district officers is from your registration with your factories authority or your shops and establishment authority, that these are the head counts of an establishment and this is the number of people who are there. And then you are being sought from that data. They seek, if at all you miss to file a report, they ask you to file the annual report.
Okay, so that means the shops and establishment registration works as a basic tool for reporting POSH.
Yes.
Okay,
it may be shop or factories, whatever the establishment.
Yeah, actually, we are registered with shop and
yeah, so that is how it flows. So based on that,
okay,
you can file it to your POSH authority, district office.
Okay, thank you, Uday.
Thanks, Vibhor. Neeti Sharma has the next question.
Hi, thank you so much. This was very helpful. So just on the same topic that the webinar was planned for, I wanted to check that, can a registered post of POSH filing be considered as sufficient? Because that's what I'd heard from some of the organizations.
See, registered post can be made subject to that you have a proper POD and other things being done and it reaches the authority within the stipulated time. And in case of any lacuna on the report or the data mismatch, probably the authority may come back to you. Yes,
Okay,
but
so
you can, it has to be filed before the authority. You can do a registered post to the district officer, the report in a proper hard copies format. That can be done.
Okay, so their receipt that we get from the registered post can be taken as proof as filing for the organization.
Yeah, your proof of delivery.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
One last question. So this is an incident that happened last year when we filed the POSH return. So the district officer did not accept the report saying that this is not the correct office. And in the previous year, when we did that with the same district officer, he accepted it and gave us an acceptance. So in that case, we were really not sure what to do.
Which location it is?
So this is Jasola District Center. And we've always had problems with Jasola because Jasola did not have a designated district officer for the POSH filing. And but we still tried to figure it out, and whoever fell in that, so we went to the Pusa Road office, and we filed it with the district officer there. So in 2018, the same district officer accepted it, but this time he sort of shooed us away.
No, which state it is? I don't know.
So this is we are in Delhi.
Delhi. Okay, give me a minute. Let me check for Delhi.
So I think in Delhi, maybe it is divided by regions or something. Again, the district officers. So our office is located in Jasola District Center in Delhi.
See, Delhi South, there are district officers who are reported in Delhi North, Delhi Central, Delhi South,
So we are
Delhi
south.
Delhi South, right? Delhi
That's
South
right.
is the Deputy Commissioner Office, South District, Mehruli, Badarpur Road, Saket. And another is Deputy Commissioner Office, New Delhi, Jamnagar House, New Delhi. So these two locations. And you have a mail ID also for them, to whom mail ID and phone numbers. I will share it. Yeah.
I just want to, kind of generalize Neeti's question to say if if an organization faces this kind of an issue where they've accepted 1 year, the next year refuses to accept, what is the course that they can take?
No, probably see that is the reason why, maybe the reason that they have been submitting earlier to a non-authorized or non-notified district officer under any presumptions.
Can I just request, if it will be really helpful if you can share the address and email ID, or you can just help me with the website and I can have a look.
So website we don't have. We kind of collated all this information through a lot of sources and we kept it.
And I think we'll share it, right?
Yeah, I'll share that repository what we have made.
We'll make that available to everybody.
Yeah. So
thank you so much, Ruchi.
The much we have taken, probably we'll share.
Yeah.
Share
all right.
And for Delhi, we have a notification also which has that this thing. So if you want 1 second, if you can allow me to share, I think I can share that.
That will be very helpful.
So post the session, Udaya, we'll share it with the participants. We have time for one last question now from Apeksha.
Sure. Yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
First of all, thank you very much for organizing this webinar. I really, really want to say thanks, because it really was very, very helpful. And I don't have a question, just a point, where Qasim's,
Neeti
could you be on mute, please? Thank you. Yeah,
Qasim's point in terms of the gender of the complainant, etc. I just my understanding after section 370 was repealed, and based on that judgment was that the POSH Act does not say biological sex, right? It says woman, which is a gender, and gender is an identity a person can have. So whether I identify biologically or not, if I identify as a woman, then I have the right to file under this act. That was my understanding, but maybe, maybe this is not the right forum, etc. But, it was just a thought. So, just wanted to highlight, this was our understanding that it's an
I understand where you are coming from, Apeksha. Yes, if you are biologically, you have been certified to be the gender of women, yes, you may fall into that. But you need to have a biological certification. But that certification, I don't think we are still at the point where we are.
Yeah. No, I think, Apeksha, in terms of identity, I don't think the act is very clear that there's still ambiguity around the gender identity aspect. So, Nishant, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so Apeksha, I think as it stands now, I would look at the POSH Act as a win in terms of diversity, because it has definitely allowed, say, employees, at least women employees, to raise complaints of sexual harassment at the workplace. But there is quite a bit for us to still go in terms of diversity and actually ensuring complete inclusion at the workplace. So as it stands now, it's a little ambiguous where the act specifically only applies to, say, women. and the general stance which might be taken by a lot of employers and even say potentially courts is that it might be restricted to biological women. But we'll just have to see how far this goes. And like Ruchira had previously said, it's up to progressive organizations to ensure that they have diversity policies in place, because nothing per se prohibits an employer from taking on record complaints of sexual harassment regardless of the gender. It's just that the act is a little restricting in terms of who can raise complaints. So, I mean, we still have a long way to go, and I guess we would have to make a move to make it more inclusive and diverse.
Absolutely. Yes, I think making it inclusive of all genders and gender identities is going to be the hope, and things will move in that direction probably. Thank you so much, Apeksha, for bringing that perspective.
Once again, thank you to each one of you. I really appreciate this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Smita, do we have anyone else or?
No more questions.
Thank you so
Ruchira.
much. All right, great. So thank you so much once again, Nishant and Udaya, for taking out the time. Thank you for the team at Interweave who've supported in making this happen. And most importantly, thank you all of you who took out time and joined into this webinar. We hope to keep bringing some of this to you, and do reach out to us if you'd like to know about any of the other work that any of the panelists are doing in this space. We'd be happy to connect you up. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.